live from the World-Herald. It is Friday night. Well, it's actually a Thursday afternoon here for the Pick Six podcast. Friday night football coming up this week. I don't know. My days are all thrown off, guys. What day is it? Where are we? I'm a little shaken.
Who are we?
Here.
Yeah, that's a good question.
No,
Trying to catch up.
This is the Pick Six podcast. I'm Evan Bland with Sam McKewon and Tom Shatel, and it is kind of a strange week, right, guys? I mean, we're going to be out on Friday night. We're not going to be covering high school game though. It'll be Nebraska, Illinois to start off the Big Ten slate. I don't know. Big deal. Is it a different vibe? It's Big Ten. They're all kind of little weird things about this game. That's one of them. Friday night.
I think, my read on it from talking to people is that the Friday thing isn't as big a deal as we thought. I think Illinois is a big deal, and starting the Big Ten, and staying undefeated, winning that first Big Ten game. These are all the things that everybody's thinking about. So, it's an inconvenience, but as I've said before, everybody is going to be fine. The high school people are going to go to their games because that's what they do, and everybody else will go to the Nebraska game or watch it. I wish they could have played every high school game tomorrow at 1:00, and then have like around the state everybody plays on at the same time, and then everybody's off at night to watch the game. And they call it Football Day in Nebraska. Well, it is Football Day in Nebraska in a different way. It's football night in Nebraska, but it's going to be fine. Yeah, you don't want to do this all the time, but for and I think the 400th. This is what I'm going to write about. So there's your little spoiler. It's very fitting that the 400th sellout is on a Friday night, because who is more resilient than Nebraska fans? Who knows how to bend and not break over the years, where your teams are not going to bowl games. They keep raising the prices. They do this, they do that, and they keep coming, and they keep coming, and so it's not Husker fans have to do something different. That's what they've been doing for years. Nobody supports their team, and nobody in the country supports their team like Nebraska fans. They are the greatest fans, and they're certainly the toughest. So I think it'll be fine. And guess what? We all get Saturday off to watch football.
That's the best part right there.
That'll be great.
Saturday off to watch a pretty good slate of college football games. I don't mind that the Friday night thing is happening once. It is, and Tom wrote about this earlier this week, it's a little irksome that other Big Ten teams can opt out of it. That seems strange to me. And on the flip side of the coin, part of me wishes Nebraska was able to opt out of it, because but they can't because of some decision that Sean Eichhorst made 7 years ago. Trev Alberts said, told me once, well, Sam, I mean, the tolerance decision is binding. And I'm like, how is it binding? We are in a new TV contract, but apparently it is, and Michigan is not forced to do it. So I think that's kind of a little unfair. But at the same time, Nebraska's got an audience on Friday night, a big audience. They're not going to probably get the Colorado TV audience, but they'll get 4 million watching Nebraska football. And if Nebraska plays well and Nebraska wins, that's only going to help their profile, whether it's recruiting or whether it's whatever you want to call it. So Nebraska's taking a little bit of a risk, but at the same time, it's a risk that's probably going to pay off if they win.
Can we just talk about the streak for a little bit? And I know it's been around for a long time, 62 years, but the 400, what a number that is. Tom, you're talking about just the resiliency of it. I was doing some research this week, and you see all these other streaks from prominent programs that have ended in the last decade, and they were all well short of what Nebraska's at. But you saw Alabama's fall, Notre Dame's fall, Oklahoma's the next closest at about 155, I think is their number right now. That's a ways back. A lot of these schools lost the sellouts as more games became televised and smartphones became the norm and people wanted to stay at home. What is the importance, do you guys think, of the streak in 2024? And we can talk about, the spirit of the thing versus the technicality of the thing, and the stadiums haven't always been full. But what's the importance of the streak to Nebraska football now, all these years later?
Well, it's the last pillar, the last thing that didn't fall in Rome. It's the last thing standing. The last, of all the Husker traditions, they've all sort of gone away. Whether the fullback or the O-line or the winning or the bowl games or all that stuff. The Red Balloons sailed away and never came back until a couple weeks ago. Yeah, it's everything. It's and I think about it. The number, back in my day. Well, this is still my day, but back in the day, it was 76. I always remember getting the box score. They used to hand out the box scores. They still do. And that number was up at the very top, 76,000, such and such. And that was every time I covered Nebraska, it was 76, whatever. Then they decided to add seats, and so more people had to come to keep the sellout thing going. And let's remember, the sellout streak is tickets sold, not butts and seats. Yes, there have been some games where there were a section that was not full, a couple sections, the South Stadium, by the students or by wherever. Yeah, we're not always been full, but the tickets were sold. That's the sellout. So I love it because it's in today's world, loyalty is very fleeting, and you keep raising prices, you don't win. I mean, I think about that. A place that won all the time stops winning, and how do you react to that? A lot of people a lot of fans would say I'm done, and but these people didn't, and it has nothing to do with there's nothing to do in the state. There's plenty to do here. Most people across the country do one thing now these days. They're on their phones. So you can do, we have lots of phones in Nebraska and everything else. So it's about the passion. That sellout streak is about the state's passion. And maybe if there was a second school that played Division I football, maybe might be different. We'll never know. But it's about the passion, and it really is unmatched.
Evan, I want to give you an opportunity, since you're writing a big story about the 400-game sellout streak, to share maybe some of what you've learned and what you think of the streak.
Well, I talked to a couple fans this week who have sort of lived this streak. They went to the cold, rainy loss to Missouri in 1962, and that started the thing. And it kind of reminds me of like a marriage. It began with a passion of a team that was undefeated, and there was an excitement, and that built up through the Osborne years and into the 2000s, and then it kind of waned. Some of the spark was gone there for a while, but both sides kept working at it, darn it. And there was that loyalty, and there was that idea that let's work things out. Maybe it was an obligation at times. It was a burden at times. I thought it was interesting to me to kind of go back and look at some of the close calls of the streak, especially in the last 10 years. There was an example of a fan in 22 who bought 2,100 tickets at $10 a pop for $21,000 just to keep the thing going. And somewhere along the line, the thing went from sort of a byproduct of winning to important on its own, sort of like the black shirts a little bit. Like it's something that just took on its own life.
Yeah, when did that happen, I wonder?
I've wondered that too. At what point that became sort of a priority?
I think it might have been in the 90s or I don't know.
I would say the 80s.
Maybe the 80s. Yeah, maybe the 80s, yeah.
Because student enrollment went down into the early 90s, and so I looked back on some World-Herald archive stuff, and they were worried even into the early 90s, late 80s, that maybe that would be an issue. Devaney himself, Bob Devaney, said in the early 90s that he thought the streak would end in 1968, right before Nebraska transformed itself with strength training and put Osborne as the offensive coordinator.
They had those 2 years, and that was like falling off the edge of the earth.
Right.
Because you weren't going to bowl games if you had that record, just because you had a winning record. It is like a marriage. I love that. It's in sickness and in health, and Osborne or Icorse, in Peterson or for better or for worse, who's the better? Well,
Well, and I'm also right in this. Like, there's a parallel between the 400 and number one. In 1962, Nebraska was 6-0 into that first sellout. They hadn't won a conference title in like 20 years. They hadn't been to a bowl game in 7, the same number that it is right now.
Wow.
And here they are again with a new head coach again, undefeated again, with a big game against another undefeated team. So like just the symmetry of the moment for number 400 is kind of eerie. And maybe it's the sellout streak's feeling a little bit more natural now than it did even 2 years ago.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think certainly it's an interesting streak in the sense that, like you said, there are a handful of benefactors who are keeping it alive. At this point, the phones have probably taken enough of the fan base away. It probably hasn't been the case to start this season, but I think it was certainly the case late last season. There are just folks that are willing to keep it alive because they think it's intrinsically important, and they want to spend a lot of money on keeping it that way. And then I think Nebraska also came up with a nice innovation where they matched those tickets with underserved youth. They did that back in 21. I think that kept the sellout streak going. It put a little bit of purpose behind it, and it maybe motivated some people to do things that maybe they wouldn't have previously done. And so I appreciate that part of it. You know, I love what you guys have to say about it. I'm probably a little less, what the right word is, romantic about it. Like at this point, I think it's a streak that might almost be keeping Nebraska back from some innovation. So long as you can say, well, we're selling out the stadium because these 3 very wealthy people keep buying tickets that people don't actually want, we're not going to transform the stadium. And so for me at this point, it's more about transform the stadium, get a new video board in North Stadium. It's not completely functional anymore. Get a video board in South Stadium, improve the experience for the fans who are showing up. And sometimes I think that sellout streak can almost work against it. Like, well, hey, I mean, everybody's buying the tickets. Why should we change anything? And at some point, you're gonna run up against, unless Rule wins big, and he may well do that, you're gonna run up against a fan base. It's like, as much as I love it, I'm gonna come once or twice a year, and I'm not gonna get season tickets because the experience at home is so good, and the experience in the stadium is not as good. Arrowhead Stadium is probably the best fan atmosphere in the NFL, right? The Chiefs, they're winning all the time. Patrick Mahomes, it's like a celebrity thing. The people get Taylor Swift's in the stadium. The Kansas City Chiefs are going to be in a new stadium probably within the next 5 to 7 years, despite the fact that they're selling all of that out because the fan experience is good.
Well, but
it's
that's
not,
the NFL, though. You can't do that in college.
You can't do that in college, but the point being that they understand that as good as the Chiefs have been, they're going to try to leverage that into, we need to build a stadium with new amenities and larger boards and put things around it. And I think the vision that Nebraska had just a couple of years ago was to try to do the same thing. Right. I think now what we're going to see is a little bit different model, and that's fine. But that's my thought on the streak. It's valuable. It has historic value. There's a romanticism to it, and it speaks very well of Husker fans. I just want to make sure that the streak doesn't prevent the kinds of innovation that I think are really helpful for fans enjoying those experiences. Because I think the enjoyment of the experience still isn't quite what it could be because Nebraska hasn't quite renovated the stadium. But, that's a populist view of the streak. I understand that. And, it's different from the more romantic view, for sure.
I don't think it's holding anything back. I I think hiring the wrong coaches was holding things back on the field. But in terms of, Trev was going to do a lot of those things, and that wasn't going to. Then they're probably going to lower the stadium capacity, which I think they probably should, which will make it easier to sell out. I'm guessing. No, I think it's. I think those things are still going to happen. I just think Troy Dannon wanted to come in and say, this is we're doing a lot here. There's a lot on the plate here. Let's do it over time. Let's kind of slow down and do it over time. I think he's been around the stadium. He knows that that there need to be chair backs. There need to be new seats.
Right.
Concessions. You need to walk around or wrap around concourse. South Stadium's going to be overhauled. But it's hard to do in college. It's just some places have done it. Missouri's doing it, and they've got an old place. So yeah, KU blew theirs up.
Yeah.
Can you imagine blowing it up, Memorial Stadium?
No.
KU blew it up.
Northwestern. Yeah.
Yeah, it has been done.
Yeah.
But Nebraska's not there yet. I don't know that the sellout streak is holding them back. I just think Nebraska, they pour a lot into their athletes. They really do.
They do. Yes.
And this space age football complex they have is it's amazing, but that costs money. And what I don't want to see happen is what Tennessee is doing, and that's putting a tax on every ticket to go to NIL.
Talent fee.
You've got to be
like a concert.
Yeah, you've got to be careful how much you go to the well. Nebraska fans are always happy to support their team, but you got to be careful with that. And I think Tennessee right now is on a roll where they won the College World Series. Their basketball is very good. And obviously football's rolling. So, yeah, people, as long as you're winning, people are going to do that. But I just think, God, when you're in the Big Ten SEC, do you have to do that? How much money do you need? So, apparently a lot. But anyway, so I think it's I think the stadium will be. I'd like to see all the things Trevor was going to do. I was in favor of. I don't know how much if they have to all be done at once or not, but yeah, I think take care of the fans and take care of the stadium, and it should be upgraded. It should be a better experience, but. If you go to people that went to the Colorado game thought that was a pretty good experience.
They did, yeah. Well, I think the street conversation too. It's part of a larger discussion of what do you do when things that are a natural byproduct of winning wither on the vine because the team's not winning anymore. So I put the streak in that. 2-3 years ago, we were talking about should the black shirts really continue to be a thing? The defense hasn't been good in a while.
Right.
The tunnel walk is the same sort of thing. At what point does the thing that was a natural outflow of winning and greatness go away? And at what point do you move on from that? And Nebraska's had a chance, I thought, in the last couple of years when things were especially down to end it. In 2020 they could have ended the streak and said, we're not going to pause it. We'll let it die quietly, and we don't have to blame anyone. We can blame the pandemic and let it go.
Sure.
And they didn't do it. And so I think that's the other thing that Nebraska's continued to work through. And maybe that changes now if they start winning again. But just this idea that how do you let go of some of those side things from back in the day as you try to push forward and create a new identity?
No, it's a good point. So I don't want to go too far down a rabbit hole here, but just as an example, what's the best facility in Nebraska athletics, in your opinion?
I mean, the new one. You're talking about
Yeah, what's the best? No, I don't talk football facility, fan facility. It's the one that Nebraska doesn't control.
PBA? Sure.
Yeah. It's the one the city bought.
Right.
And so historically what we've seen is if you leave it up to Nebraska to do it, they're gonna go ahead and bank on the fans just keeping coming. And the two facilities that, Haymarket Park I know is getting a little long on the tooth, but it's still a really nice place. Mm-hmm. The press box isn't great, and now we're not even in the press box, but everything else is pretty nice. Well, the city built that too. Right. And so, and I credit Nebraska for being behind that, but, Devaney wasn't getting renovated. That wasn't happening. They weren't. Now, Devaney got renovated for John Cook because, and I give John Cook a lot of credit here, John Cook does not F around. John Cook has a vision, and he goes in and says, this is what I want. I want Cameron Indoor Stadium for volleyball, and I'm going to get it. And he could do that. But when you think about the facilities that Nebraska, fans enjoy the most, it's the ones that Nebraska didn't build. And so I think that's one of the challenges is that Nebraska knows the fans are going to show up, and that's cool and that's great. But since Bill Byrne, we haven't really had that hey, I'm going to build all these things and do this and do that. And I shouldn't be unfair to soccer. Soccer did build a facility, and it's a nice place, and appreciate what they've done. But, that's, I think, one of the areas where I would just say Nebraska has an opportunity to get better. And you can keep the streak and renovate the stadium at the same time. In fact, it's going to become easier in theory because you're going to have fewer seats. Mm-hmm. But, if, for example, there's donor money that is allocated to maintaining the streak. Let's say it's $400,000 a year. That's $400,000 you're not putting toward the renovation. And so those are some of the things that I work through. Again, it's a really contrarian populist view. I understand that. I've come to that conclusion over time that that's how I feel about it. I understand that a lot of people don't agree with that perspective and that maybe it's a little unfair to Nebraska, but that's kind of I think the best atmospheres are the ones where the fans pack the stadium because they want to be there, not because, hey, we have a sellout today, but there's only 42,000 people here. Mm-hmm. That's my perspective on it. I know it's different from other people's, but that's just the way I see it.
I do appreciate that, but I think it's more of a Nebraska attitude. I mean, go around the state, and I think people enjoy frills. They enjoy, high-end comfort, but you don't see it. I mean, people are not, and they're on the state, are not lining up to spend their money on just anything. It's got to mean something. It's got to be really good. But I think that's changing a little bit. I think Omaha has helped change that. I think a new arena, a new baseball park when nobody wanted it, has shown the way. Oh yeah, this is cool. We can have this all the time. It changed our city. It changed the way we look at events and sports. It changed the way we spend money. It changed everything. It upped the ante in every possible way, and it's made our city better. I don't know that that's the case in Lincoln. Now they've got a new basketball. They like that basketball arena, don't they? So maybe that's changing also. But I just don't think that on the list of things to do, that upgrading facilities or maybe building a new one was high on the list a lot of times. So, but I do appreciate your point, and I can see that, yeah, you can lean on Husker fans. As long as they're coming, you don't have to do much. But the other side of that is they kept firing football coaches. Why? Because they wanted the fans to keep coming.
Right.
The fans demanded, well, if you don't win, you're out. And that's when I say Husker fans are undefeated against apathy. That's what I'm talking about.
Yes.
They'll never be apathetic. Forget it. Don't ever mention it. It'll never happen. They will never say, I don't care. They'll always care a lot. And if you don't win, you'll be gone. You're not just going to keep somebody around because they like them. So,
well, think of the last 20 years. I mean, they added skyboxes, they added luxury suites, they added chairbacks, and the product on the field was largely blah.
Yeah.
And so, if you offered those fans the chance to have the amenities they've had the last 10 to 15 years, or the on-field success that they had in the 90s and the 80s and the 70s, I think they're going to take the winning football,
yes,
and you figure it out. So obviously you want to have both.
And Nebraska did make a decision to expand their stadium to try to match the capacity of Michigan and Ohio State and Penn State back in the mid-2000s, right after they joined the Big Ten, instead of renovating the stadium.
Right.
That's a very reasonable point. They did change East Stadium, and they put a lab in there that nobody's quite sure what they do. You've written multiple stories about that over the years, and so. But again, that's a podcast for a different day. I think as it relates to Friday, it's going to be fun. They're going to have cool things for the 400 sellout, and Nebraska's going to. I think Nebraska's playing a good enough team in Illinois that they're going to help. That those things are going to help them try to win the game.
So, I guess let's talk about the game Friday night, Nebraska, Illinois. It's a top 25 matchup. It's been more than a decade since it's been a 25 top 25 on top 25 team at Memorial Stadium. So. I thought the way that Matt Rule said it Monday was interesting, where he said Illinois is the mirror image of Nebraska in a lot of ways. Physical defense, kind of balance on offense, how they want to go about it. So if the matchups and the style of play are generally even between the two teams, then what other factors become more important in deciding the game? Like game 2 for Colorado, it was they have the advantage on the lines, and so let's lean on the lines. If the matchups are generally even and the talent is more or less even, what other stuff do we learn about Nebraska that becomes important in this game?
Well, I don't know that the talent is even. Okay. I think I thought about this, driving down here today. Was okay. If what's the difference in this game going to be? And I think by saying Illinois, mirror image, that means Nebraska is trying to be more of a Big Ten team, because Illinois is the classic Big Ten team with the classic Big Ten coach. They know how to play the game, and they, it's again, to answer your question, this game you play cleanly, you hold your own on the, you play physical up front, you don't turn it over. That keeps you in the game. If you don't do those two things, you're probably going to lose this kind of game. But if you do those, physical up front, play clean, then let the talent take over. I think Dylan Raiola is one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Now this is game 4, right? It's not going to be perfect, and he'll see pressure for the first time since he's played at Nebraska this week. He'll see defenses and disguises and pass rush that he hadn't faced yet. His spring game, he didn't get touched. Fall camp, green jersey, okay, UTEP, so forth. No, this is where it all begins for him. But running back, receivers, tight ends, I got to give the nod to Nebraska on as far as offensive talent. And quite frankly, defensive talent up front. This is where those guys need to show up. They've shown up every game. They didn't tackle last week, but the Ty Robinsons and Nash, Polar Bears, and so on, Tommy Hills. This is where you show up. They did it against Colorado. This is another step up from Colorado. So. Talent is where I say, and Illinois is not saying they're not talented. I just think Nebraska has a little bit more, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think that's fair. One of the things that I've been thinking about this week, and I went back and watched all of Illinois' games to kind of sense, okay, what is Illinois doing? What is Nebraska doing? I still think the jury is a little bit out, and maybe this sounds a little odd. I think the jury's a little bit out on how well Nebraska can run the ball, because they have spent a lot of time in the first 3 games trying to get Dylan Raiola going. I thought against Northern Iowa that made sense because, Nebraska had such a significant advantage at the wide receiver versus defensive back spot. But this is a game where I'm actually kind of curious how Nebraska runs the ball, not using a quarterback to help them. And I'm not sure. I'm not sure I have the answer to that. I think they've rotated the backs a lot. In my opinion, 2 have clearly emerged. In their opinion, I'm wrong. They're the coaches. They know more than I do. So there's been a lot of, hey, let's take care of this guy, and let's make sure this guy plays, and this, and this. And Ja'Cory Barney's going to get 3 carries a game. So I think they've done a lot of variety. It's kind of like the snack pack where you get all the different chips or the cereals. So now we're going to find out, I think, more of like, okay, you're playing a team that can kind of stop you if they want. How committed are you going to be to the run game versus, letting Dylan throw it. So that's one of the questions I have. I do think Nebraska's got more talent on the defensive side of the ball. And I think Tom makes a good point about the offensive skill. I think it's probably close to even, but I'll give Nebraska an edge there. And Nebraska should win the game. Like, they're favored by 7 at 7.5 to 8 for a reason. At the same time, and Tom mentioned this, I think, a couple weeks ago, like, you kind of got to see it. Before you can say, yeah, they're going to do it, you got to kind of see confirmation that they do it.
I think the last 2 weeks, Sam, they've Satterfield has really played to their whatever their advantage was going to be.
Yes.
Their strength in that game. Colorado is going to be, we're going to be physical up front. We're going to run them at them. They can't stop that. That's when they tried to pass, Colorado's speed caught up to them and didn't have a lot, going on there. Last week, you weren't going to run on UNI. It sounds crazy, right? But they're pretty good against the run. But they had probably no chance against Nebraska's speed. So you air it out a little bit. Look, Satterfield wants to throw it. Right? We all know that. So what's it going to be this week? Is there an advantage? Do they have an advantage throwing against Illinois or running? I don't know if it would be running. So if they can't run, how much do they stay with it?
Mm-hmm.
If they get stopped early, how much do they stay with it? Does the passing game help open up the run for later in the game?
How long has it been since Nebraska could say that?
Well, I mean, you got that screen pass that worked. They've got a guy who can throw a screen pass, who can complete it. Jet sweeps. It's just a Harburg game. Harburg had a lot of success last year against Illinois.
He did.
So, it's they see him coming, their eyes will get big again. So, this is a very interesting game for the OC. And he's going to have to call a good game, but I think he has a lot to work with.
I think this is the first time, too, where the things that we've talked about from the first 3 games that have been deficiencies make a difference in the outcome, right? Like, you think about the UTEP game, it was – well, the third down offense, it hasn't been very good. And against Colorado, it was the penalties. And last week against Northern Iowa, it was the tackling. It was a little bit leaky at times. And can Nebraska make a clutch field goal when it needs to go ahead or make it a 2-score game or whatever? And it hasn't mattered because they've had more talent and been able to pull away in the second half. But, this is a game where that stuff, field position, comes into play in ways that it hasn't. So it'll be interesting to see how that turns out. And Nebraska still hasn't won a 1-score game under Matt Rule. That hasn't happened yet. They won a lot of games by more than that, but this is maybe one of those chances to get that monkey off your back and say that in a close game, Nebraska can execute and find a way to win.
Over the next 4 weeks, 5 weeks, it's Illinois at Purdue, Rutgers at Indiana. Those are your 4 games before they play Ohio State. I think we will know a lot about this particular program in year 2 by the time they play Ohio State. We'll learn something when they play Ohio State as well, but I think we will know a lot about this program, where it is in year 2, by the time that Ohio State game arrives in late October. Because you look at the 4 teams that are on Nebraska's schedule, none of them are Ohio State, let's be honest. None of them are USC. I would go so far as to say that none of them are as good as Iowa. They're all teams that you would consider to be Nebraska's peers in terms of talent and coaching and development. And I'm not telling anyone that Nebraska's going to be 4-0 or 0-4. But there's, as we all know, there's multiple options in there. There's 4-0, there's 3-1, there's 2-2, there's 1-3, and there's 0-4. There's 5 options. And if you tell me that Nebraska is the top 2 options there, I think you're saying there's some really good things going on here, and if Nebraska were the bottom 2 options, I think there would be cause for concern. It's possible that it's going to be in the middle, and it's going to be 2-2. But we'll learn a lot about Nebraska football by the time that game comes around. These next 4 weeks are going to tell you a lot. Yeah, all these teams are not bad, but they're not elite.
This is and again, these teams are looking at Nebraska like here's a chance for us to win.
Right.
Nebraska's a program learning how to win, and but that's where the first 3 games were very smart and should help, is that they gave Nebraska a shot of confidence. Instead of playing somebody really good and losing, it kind of knocks you back a bit and you have a loss. You go into these games where confidence and execution and not turning the ball over is going to help you. You've got to make plays to win these games. And so they've been used to making plays the first 3 weeks. So I think that helps. But, yeah, I mean, it's you look at these anything can happen. I mean, so they've got to – but that's what you want. You got to go do it. Nobody's going to hand it to you in this league. You got to go do it. So, again, I think they've got the talent and the physicality. They play clean. They turn it over, then here come the orange and blue. The orange not they're not great, but they'll be good enough to come in and win if you give it to them. So, it should be fun.
I kind of feel like this is the first game this season for Nebraska too, where the opponent is different maybe than people projected it to be. Like, I don't think people thought Illinois would be coming to Lincoln as a top 25 team. Maybe some did, but
no.
Is it?
But I think they're and that's going to be true.
I don't think they are a top 25 team. They're ranked in the top 25. But I don't think they are.
It's because they beat Kansas,
yes.
right?
Sure.
But who is Kansas right now? And that's
to be determined. Yeah.
So it doesn't mean Illinois. It shouldn't be a strike against Illinois. It's just we don't know. But we'll find out a lot about Illinois Friday night.
Well, and that's kind of what I'm getting at is like when they play Indiana in a few weeks, that's a game that I think will be different than people thought it was going to be a month ago. USC kind of the same way, UCLA kind of on the other end of that spectrum. Does Illinois' start affect in any way kind of how you would gauge or evaluate Nebraska based on how they play Friday? Or is Illinois still kind of the team you thought they would be, except, hey, they have a number 24 next to their name?
I think it's more for the latter for me, but for Indiana, it's the former.
I agree.
So, Indiana, the way Indiana's played up to this point changes that completely. I think UCLA's got a lot of problems, but you don't go out there and win 42-13 unless you're pretty good. So they're probably going to be 6-0 or 7-0 when they play Nebraska. They play Charlotte, Northwestern. I mean, the schedule's not real hard, So I think they have an opportunity to start really fast. I don't have a vote anymore, which is fine by me. I would have Indiana in the top 25, but not Illinois. That just based on what I've seen and the little stat matrix that I keep. So I think Illinois is a fine team. I don't know that they're any better or any worse than they were last year, and it's still entirely possible, Evan, that they finish 5-7. Like it's not. They could finish 7-5. They could finish 5-7. Maybe if they're lucky, they're Northwestern and they do what Northwestern did last year. But Nebraska beat that Northwestern team. So like people would say, well, I mean Northwestern was 8-5. They were, but Nebraska beat that team, and I think Illinois is probably in the same boat. And to me, to some degree, Evan, this game is more about Nebraska than it is about the opponent. When Nebraska plays at Indiana, it may well be more about Indiana. And when they play at Ohio State, it'll absolutely be more about Ohio State. Not that Nebraska can't play really well that day. So I think this game is an important one. I think Nebraska can win it. I think they will win it. But, they got to go out and do it. Like Tom said this a couple of different times. Like, he's not going to sit here and say they're going to win 9 or 10 games until they show that they're getting to a bowl game first. And to me, this is a bowl game kind of game. Like, hey, you want to make a bowl? You want to get that done before you get to November? Here's a football game that you can win and win at home on the 400 sellout on a Friday night, all those things.
You going to go to picks?
You want to do any volleyball?
We can. Yeah, we can talk about that for a couple minutes.
They were good last night.
Yeah. Pounded number 2 Stanford.
Yeah, I'll talk about volleyball. Wow. That's kind of the team we thought they were, and they have been that. They had the one night off in SMU. That's allowed. You play a lot of matches. It's kind of like college basketball. You're going to lose early. It doesn't throw you off what your goals are. It isn't, it doesn't bother. It doesn't affect who you are necessarily. You just got to take the hit and keep going, and they certainly did. Maybe it woke them up. But I think the way they played last night, that highest level that they have, and if they have a level higher than that, then game over. I think but judging who they've beaten, Kentucky, Creighton, if they can beat Louisville on Sunday,
Arizona State,
they should be number one. But they may not be because that's Pitt and they're still undefeated. But Nebraska, to me, if they win Sunday, will be the number one team in the country based on what they've done.
Yeah, with that, I think Pitt's the number one team in the country.
Right.
Apparently, they haven't lost a set. Kudos to them. Kudos. I think Nebraska played Pittsburgh in the Final Four last year and beat it pretty good. So my guess is that Nebraska's probably the better team overall. They may not be number one. They have to go play at Louisville. Andy Jackson is in many ways the story of the team, even though the team is full of all-stars.
Stonewall Jackson.
And
what a nickname.
Full of, superstar players who are also high-profile. I mean, Lexi Rodriguez and Harper Murray are super high-profile athletes. Andy Jackson may be the best one of the bunch. And, she didn't necessarily have the same volleyball youth story that some of the others did. I think she came to the sport a little later. But she's an incredible athlete and, probably could help Amy Williams' basketball team. She could. She's not going to, but she could. She's legitimately dominant. And she's got a great vertical. I mean, not everybody who's 6'4" and is a middle blocker in volleyball can jump as high as she does. And she jumps really high. So they're going to be hard to beat. They're probably going to lose another one along the way. It's not the end of the world. They have a very hard Big Ten schedule for people that have delved into that. They're on the road for a month or something. I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks. And they got to go out to Oregon and Washington. They're probably going to lose somewhere in there. But I think it's a really, really good team that's also kind of starting to figure out its chemistry a little bit and some of its roles. And, they have a ton of momentum. The Arizona State win was great. That team, Arizona State's very good. And they swept ASU, and then they come back and they sweep Stanford. And I do think they're going to go win at Louisville on Sunday. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think they're going to win that match.
I think they will.
And then here we go. Then they're in Big Ten play, and they're the best team in the Big Ten.
What they're trying to do is very difficult. That's get back to the national championship game. I mean, not a lot of programs are trying to do that. Nebraska feels like if they don't do that, what did they do this year? There's a lot of pressure to do that. And they had so many, great moments and wins last year. It's kind of like, okay, now we got to go do it again. We have to win the Big Ten again. We have to beat Wisconsin again and be number one. It's a grind, and especially when you've already done it the year before, you got to come back and do it again to get to get to your goal. I kind of wondered about that. I wonder if they'll have a spark, if that'll be too much, if just trying to match last year will be too much for this team. And I think what we saw last night was they got the spark, and here I think the chemistry came alive last night, and here we go.
Well, the further in the rearview mirror that SMU loss gets, I think maybe the more valuable it could be too. In the moment, obviously you're surprised and concerned, but the way they've responded has been nothing short of amazing. And I just contrast that with a year ago when they were undefeated so late into the season, and you could just kind of feel that pressure, and it built up, and they're having to talk about it and think about it. And so having a loss and maybe another couple before the postseason, that's not the end of the world at all. I think in some ways it allows them to focus on what they're doing and not have to try to protect some undefeated record or something like that. I think that loss, as they go along, may end up being more valuable. But we'll see.
We'll see.
All right.
Time for picks.
Let's do it.
Evan last week won by one game. He was, I believe, 8-4. And then Tom and I were both 7-5.
All right.
Evan now leads the season series 24-10. I'm 2 back at 22-12, and Tom is 21-13. Are we ready? Let's start with the Floyd of Rosedale. Iowa, Minnesota, and Minneapolis, Saturday night on NBC. I'm taking Iowa.
All right.
I'm going to take Iowa as well.
Yep, Iowa.
All three going with Kirk Ferentz. Big game for PJ Fleck. Baylor at Colorado. Coach Prime off a win at Colorado State.
I think
Well, go ahead.
because it's in Colorado, I'm going to go Buffs.
Evan, go see you.
It's supposed to rain and rain hard at times. Maybe I think that'll impact Colorado's passing game. I'm going to go Baylor. They found a running back last week. They're not great, but I'll take Baylor.
I'll also take Colorado. Utah at Oklahoma State. This could be a preview of the Big 12 championship. Tom's doing the
Pistol
I got to
Pete?
go Gundy. Go Gundy.
Yeah, I agree. OSU.
That makes three of us. I'm going Oklahoma State as well. Northwestern at Washington.
UW.
Classic Big Ten game. Huskies.
Oh, yes. Washington for me as well. I will get into a few interesting ones. USC at Michigan.
SC.
SC.
Their win over LSU's dimmed a little bit, but I still think USC. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to take SC as well. Michigan played better last week. I will say that. They ran the ball. They had 300 yards. Arkansas at Auburn.
I'll go Arkansas.
Arkansas for Tom.
Same. I don't trust Auburn right now.
Not very good. I'm going to go with War Eagle. They're the home team. Michigan State at Boston College. I'm going BC here. I think Michigan State's magic early season ride is over.
Yeah, agree. BC.
Yeah, Boston College.
Michigan State plays in the next 2 weeks. They play BC, then they play Ohio State, then they play Iowa. So they're going to be 3-3 after that. Kansas State at BYU. K-State's hot. BYU, tough place to play. They usually upset one team a year. Is this going to be that game?
I'm going to go EMAW.
Every man a Wildcat? Yeah, every man a Wildcat.
You know, I'm going to go same. We haven't had that many differences this week.
Not yet.
Purdue at Oregon State.
I'll
Both teams got hammered last week. Hammered.
go Beaver Nation.
Oregon
I think
State.
the location to me is the difference. Oregon State.
I think Purdue's the better team. I think Oregon State's going to win. It's the best way to put it. I don't know what happened with Purdue last week. I actually picked Purdue to win. They didn't win. Tennessee at Oklahoma. I'm taking Tennessee. That's a football team.
I'm going to go Vols as well.
I'm going to go Boomer.
Josh Heupel going back to Norman. Rutgers, Virginia Tech. I'm going Virginia Tech. I thought about it. I'm going Virginia Tech.
I like Rutgers.
Yeah, I'm going to go Jersey Boys.
All right. And then the last one, Nebraska, Illinois. Does anyone dare pick against Matt Rule in this?
I'll take Nebraska.
No, I think Nebraska.
Me as well. Not a lot of differences this week, but you know what? There's a few. There's a few
A
in
little
there.
bit.
That's how it's going to be.
Next week's going to be fun. Next week's going to be fun. There's going to be some games next week, including Alabama, Georgia.
Hey, and a lot of these games that we're talking about, we can watch on Saturday. How about that?
I'm looking forward to it. Is there one in particular that you really want to sit down and watch? Probably not any Big Ten games in that bunch, right?
Well, I mean, USC Michigan is still interesting.
Yeah, that's a good
to me.
point.
That'll be fun.
That'll be one.
Tennessee OU.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's gonna
Iowa,
be fun.
Minnesota, just because of the
Yeah, I'm a sicko too.
principals involved. And
Yeah.
they absolutely hate each other. The hate games are the best.
Yeah, that's going to be fun.
This is a genuine question that we can end the podcast with. How high is Colorado on your list every week? Now that you can choose to watch Colorado this week and watch Deion Sanders and his team. Is it high on the list?
No, it's not.
It's low.
For me, it is. Yeah.
It's, last year it was high, and then as they went through the league and kept losing, it got lower for me every week. But it's just such a soap opera and a train wreck and even last week's game they had this first half disaster, then they come back and overwhelm them. But it's just all this. He won't shake hands after the game, and the quarterback, and it's just everything is so. It's just such a drama, and I can't stop watching it.
Yeah, I'm the same way. It's pretty high on my list, actually.
It's high, really.
Yeah.
From the drama perspective or the football perspective?
Yeah.
Or both?
Both.
Really?
Here's the thing. I think Colorado's actually pretty good. I don't think they're great, but I don't think they're that bad. And I think they're not going to win the Big 12, but they could beat somebody and maybe surprise people a little bit. And here's the second question. Should Nebraska fans be rooting for Colorado from here on out? I think they should.
Yeah, it makes them look better for sure.
Uh-huh. And I don't think Nebraska fans can do that.
No, I don't think they should. I think they should root against them. I mean, it isn't going to put Nebraska in the playoff or anything. It's just, you want, if it's a rival, you want them to lose every game. So, yeah. Colorado's not going to, they're going to win a few, but the Big 12 is pretty good, and it's better than the Pac-12 was last year. It's got better coaches. It's got better players. I think Colorado is going to have a hard time in some of these games. Maybe not this week, but they're going to have a hard time. They go to UCF and
they have a hard schedule.
They're pretty good. Yeah. They got K-State at home. They got Utah, Arizona down there. I mean, it just they go to KU, and who knows what that'll be able. But I see Colorado was just kind of a paper tiger. If they hit a bunch of plays with their skill, they're going to beat you, or they're going to have a chance to beat you. But if you do what North Dakota State and Nebraska did, they're going to be in trouble. So
they play the 5 best teams in the Big 12.
And Colorado State, make no mistake, Colorado State was not very good. So, but you're right. Colorado, their defense isn't that bad. But I just think they're just so weird. They're just such a team of these high-end personalities. Like this week, Dion going after the sports writers and then the weatherman, and heck, Brett Bielema went after the weatherman and sports writers too. So it was a bad week for us.
What did Brett Bielema say about the weatherman?
He said those are the two jobs. Those are the two jobs you could do. Yeah, you don't have to be right.
Yeah, you don't have to be right.
Yeah.
I don't know why that came from.
I'm thinking that's a line he's used before. The way he delivered it.
I would like weatherman. All right. Well, I hope the weather stays away on Friday night.
I do too. I hope everyone enjoys the game Friday night. Take off work a little bit earlier, and then watch some games Saturday with no vested interest. So for Sam and Tom, I'm Evan. This is the Pick 6 podcast. Thanks for listening.